All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Encouraging Truth series. We are on Encouraging Truth number 24. First, if you don't know anything about our ministry and you want to know more about us, go online to womensbiblestudy.com. There you can learn everything you need to know about us. This is a series that we started actually a long time ago when COVID started and everyone was quarantined, so we wanted to just every Monday morning give you something to hopefully encourage you throughout your week, and then we just kind of kept going with it, so that's what we're doing. So our Encouraging Truth number 24 is this: we are part of something bigger than ourselves. Now, because we're in this the middle of this like election season, we're just kind of hopefully coming out of the whole coronavirus thing. We see a lot of racial tension. The country seems to be going just totally berserk right now. And I would say, as long as I've been alive, I've never ever seen it like this before. So I was talking to my daughter one morning, and I said, you know what? Things are changing in the world, but if we read the Bible, things always changed in the Bible. Like nothing is ever meant to stay the same. And the reason why we want to talk about this today is because we see all the crazy madness that's going on in front of us, but there really honestly is a big picture. So as Christians, I want us to start looking at life with a big picture outlook and not just what's going on in the news for the moment. So with this whole thought of God seems to be changing the world, we need to say, you know what, God? Things are changing in the world, but you know what? You created me to be born in this time period. So here's what I want to do. I say, God, whatever you're doing on this earth, how can I be a part of it? Because if we read the Bible and we look through all the people like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and Moses and Peter and Paul, it's really weird when you read it. It's not even like their life was about them personally. Their lives were part of this overarching story that God had that would affect you and I thousands of years later. So we started thinking, what if we could look at our lives with this big picture? Not just living for today, not just living in this natural realm, where we just look at things like, oh, that tragedy happened, or that person got sick, or oh my gosh, that person died, or oh wow, that person hurt me. But instead, that we can live here in the spiritual realm. In the spiritual realm where there's angels and demons and God and miracles and prayer, answered prayer, and heaven and hell. And when something happens in the natural realm that we actually don't understand at the time, it's as if God is trying to get our attention and say to us, I need you to fix your eyes on the spiritual realm. I need you to look at the big picture, not the natural that's right in front of you. Because here's this, in the spiritual realm, He knows things we don't. We have to remember that. He knows things that we don't, that's going on in our life and around us. I want us to be encouraged by this thought today. Because maybe for you, you're going through a divorce or a heartache or a sickness. But here's what I want you to know. It may not actually have anything to do with you at all. It may have something to do with this plan that God has to bring someone to Jesus. Because remember, when you and I surrender our life to Christ, our job is to promote Him in this world. But sometimes in order to do that, He has to give us a platform. But sometimes the platform He gives us takes us where we never ever thought we would ever go. And it's not even where we ever wanted to go. So today I want to talk about Kent Brantley. I know we used him in a previous lesson, which of course I can't even remember what lesson that was, but Kent Brantley wrote a book here called Called for Life. And he says in the book that his goal was really simple. He and his wife both prayed this. They said, God, we want to tell people about you. We want to serve the people that will be able to find you by what we do. And what he did was he was a medical missionary in Liberia. And his whole thing was, God, I'll do whatever. I just want to serve you. But God did that. He answered his prayer, but not in a way that he ever would have imagined. Because Kent Brantley went over to Liberia to help people that had contracted the Ebola disease. He went there to help others, but while he was there, he was one that contracted Ebola. It actually was a death sentence at the time. Now, little natural picture would be like, wow, God, thanks. This sucks. Why would you do this to me? I'm working for you. I've given my life to you. Why would you do this to me? Big picture, God's like, you know what? I'm going to use you, Kent, to reach millions of people. And God was going to use Kent to find this cure, and he would be one of 3 vials that they had even available that would help come up with a cure. But at the time that Kent prayed that prayer, he had no idea what was coming down the road. And God was honored through the bad, and Kent had to learn to not look at it through the natural, but instead to look through it with spiritual eyes. It was as if God said this, I think it's cute, like, hey, really? Kent, you want to tell people about me? That's awesome. I'm going to do something you can't even imagine. I'm not only going to give you Ebola, but I'm going to put all these pieces together. You're going to get one of those 3 vials of drugs that were available, and then I'm going to heal you. And then you're going to go and have a press conference with 18 million viewers. And Kent, you'll be able to talk about me. You'll be able to talk about Jesus and what he did. And all of that happened because he surrendered his life to help people come to Jesus in Liberia. But God did something even more amazing, because not only that happened, but unbeknownst to him, they would try out this drug that actually worked. But it took Kent looking at life with this big picture spiritual mentality, not just saying, you know, God, I'm sick and this is not fair and I'm just so mad at you, but staying and said, God, my life is yours. Honestly, use me for such a time as this, whatever that looks like. See, for some of you, you're at a place where you just don't really want to be. You can't find the job. You can't find the right guy to marry. Your husband just walked out the door. You can't pay your bills. You're just not feeling any better. But as a follower of Jesus, I'm hoping today will help you see that there really is a big picture going on. And I'm hoping today you can shift your focus and your mind and everything from the problems in the natural realm to start looking at them in the spiritual realm. And being able to say, you know what, God, I just want you to use me during the divorce, during the sickness, just use me however you want to, because I'm here to serve you. Kent Crockett tells a story of a man who stopped at a red light. It turns green, but he doesn't go, and the guy behind him starts honking at him. But what the guy in the front sees is a little old lady crossing the road, and the guy behind him can't see it. So he kept honking and honking, and finally the guy in the front gets out, walks behind, hands him the keys, and says, if you want to run over the little lady, then be my guest. But the problem was the guy in the back couldn't see what the guy in the front could see. And see, that's kind of how it is with us. A lot of times things happen in our life and we don't even understand what God's doing. We can't see. We're like the person in the second car behind, and we're honking the horn like, God, let's go, let's keep going. And God's like, could you just hang on? I'm doing something that you don't see. So I want to kind of do this overarching timeline, and I want to land on the life of Joseph, because we want to learn a really good lesson from him this morning. In this overarching timeline, I want you to see that just like the people in the Bible that we're going to see, that we're a part of something bigger than us. And I want us to really grasp that today. So we'll talk about this timeline. Of course, it starts with creation, and then you've got Adam and Eve. You know, they were part of something bigger that we're dealing with, you know, thousands and thousands and thousands of years later. And then, you know, that's what broke this relationship with God. And then 1,500 years of just wickedness and wickedness. I thought this was cute. Someone wrote this. The gene pool could have used a little chlorine, okay? By the time that everyone was wicked. And then Noah comes along. And then there's this big flood. And it's just this starting over process. And so God decides to start over with a man by the name of Abraham. So he's part of this big, big picture that he doesn't know. God calls him to move to a new nation, and he doesn't really understand what's going on. And there was a lot of bad things that happened in his life and a lot of hurt and heartache. But you know what? God always used it for something bigger. We see Abraham has a son named Isaac. Isaac has a son named Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons. And one of those 12 sons is who I want to talk about, and his name was Joseph. Joseph is actually Jacob's very, very favorite son because Jacob loved Joseph's mom more than any of the other women. And because of that, the 10 older brothers, they were very jealous of Joseph. And they wanted to just get rid of him. So they one day see him, they look up and they see these slave traders coming to go to Egypt, and they decide, instead of killing their brother, they would just put him on that little trader train, whatever it was, and send him on to Egypt. And they would just tell their dad, "Dad, sorry, Joseph died." This was their plan. So I was thinking, how would you feel if you were Joseph? Like, imagine the heartache and the confusion as he's on this, they didn't have trains like the camels and the wagon. Like, he's on this wagon to Egypt, and he's like, what just happened? Little picture would be like this. What the heck? Big picture, God is like, Joseph, I have a plan. So for Joseph, he gets to Egypt. Life isn't very much better in the natural realm. He's not only sold into slavery, taken to a new country, he's now falsely accused of rape, thrown into prison. He ran from the woman, but she cried rape. He ends up going to prison for something that he did not do. He stood up for God. He stood up for his morals. But still, in the natural realm, we'd be like, I'm sorry, God, but my life stinks at this particular time. But God, in the spiritual realm, was doing something that Joseph could never even understand. And God is doing the same with you. A lot of people right now have the whole my life stinks moments. But we need to focus on what God is doing and not on why we hate our life the way it's going right now, but just to get onto a different level and say, you know what? I don't like what's going on, but I know God is doing something that's, I don't know what, but God, I'm all in with whatever you want to do. So God gives Joseph the ability to discern dreams. Pharaoh had a dream. It scared him to death. And Joseph came in and said, Pharaoh, there's going to be 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of drought. Because of what Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh makes Joseph second in command. And Joseph worked really hard. He worked hard for 7 years, storing all the food, and then the famine hits 7 years, after that, and the beginning of the 7 years. And not only was Egypt hurting because of lack of food, but so were the people in Israel. And the people in Israel, which were Joseph's family, his father and now his 11 brothers, they're stuck in Israel with no food. So they come to Egypt, and they come face to face with Joseph, who now looks like an Egyptian, talks like an Egyptian. They have no idea that this is the brother that they sold into slavery years and years and years before. Actually, 27 years. 27 years. And finally, Joseph is confronted with the brothers. And Joseph's life had drastically changed by that time. For some of you, your life feels like Joseph. But here's the good news that I want you to stand on. Joseph was confused, but God was not. So you may be confused at what God's doing in your life, but God is not confused even the least bit. I like this. The trail of God at work rarely follows a straight line. What seems so awful and confusing in your life, please know this. God really does have a big picture. But the problem with you and I is all we can see is what's in front of us, what's right in front of us. This made me laugh. A man laid sprawled on 3 entire seats of a movie theater. The usher came by and noticed this and said, "Sir, you can't have 3 seats. You have to just be in one." The man mumbled something but didn't move. The usher becomes impatient. He says, "Sir, if you don't get up, I'm going to call the manager." Then the manager called the police, and the police show up. And he's like, "All right, buddy, what's your name?" And The man says, Sam, and he says, where are you from? And he said, the balcony. And see, all the officer could see was someone was taking up 3 seats, but he couldn't see the whole picture. The guy falls from the balcony, he's hurt. Like, it's this big picture view. Most people just look at what's right in front of them. So I want you to think about your life like this. In the natural, we feel sad about life. My husband left me. I lost a child. I went bankrupt. And those are really sad things. Please understand, I am not minimizing that whatsoever. But there's something about starting to think about the bad in your life in this big picture, spiritual realm thinking. And go, you know what, God, my life feels really yucky right now. But you know what, I know you're doing something. I know you're giving me a platform just like you did to Kent Brantley. God, would you just use me like you did with him? And see, for a lot of people, that just might be a word for you today. You may be looking at all the bad in your life and those that hurt you, and you know, it's like your parents or your ex-husband, or you were bullied in high school, and you start blaming everybody. And you're allowing them to ruin your present and your future. You can live like that, and you can be miserable. Or you can do what Joseph did. He kept his focus on God. He kept his focus on the spiritual realm and not the natural realm. God is doing something and I'm going to trust him with it, is how Joseph felt. But you know what happened during those 27 years when all this bad stuff was happening in his life? He grew up. He learned to forgive. He became compassionate. He learned patience. And when he met his brothers 27 years later, he was ready for them. And not in the way that you would think. Because if you're living in the natural, you're going to be angry and want to get back at him. But by this point, he had learned that God was using him and giving him a platform. Look at Genesis 50, verse 20. After Joseph reveals himself to his brothers, he says this, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about this present result to preserve many people alive." See, we live in Arizona and we live close to Mexico, so it would be like if my sister or brother sold me into, you know, a Mexican slave trading whatever, I end up in a Mexican prison. I go, how would I feel about my sister or brother if I saw them 27 years later after I had been in prison? See, I think Joseph could act as kindly as he did to his brothers because he quit looking in the natural realm. He realized that for as bad as his life was, God had a bigger picture in mind. So he tells his brothers, "Therefore do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones." So he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. He was kind to his brothers. He loved the very men who threw him in a pit, sold him to slave traders 27 years earlier. Think about that in your everyday life. Someone hurts you. Your husband leaves you, your best friend gossips about you, and in the natural, all we want to do is I just want to get back at them. I just can't believe they did that to me. But in the spiritual realm, you know what you can do? You can say, you know what? How sad for them. Their loss. How sad for them. I wonder what happened in their life that pushed them to treat me like that. You know what? I think I'm going to start praying for them. I'm going to treat them with kindness. See, if we look at these things in the natural realm, we're just going to be miserable and hateful and try to get back at them. But if we can look at things in the spiritual realm, everything changes. We go from this inward focus to this upward focus. And we focus on, okay, what is God doing? And how can I be used by him to point others to Jesus during this difficult situation? Because remember, that's kind of our job as a follower of him. But for Joseph, he reveals himself to his brothers, and his family moves to Egypt. And then Joseph eventually dies. But you know what we see looking back? Is that Joseph was part of this huge, big picture. And I bet even Joseph, at the time in his life, he had no idea how much of an impact he would have to future generations and how his story would impact us thousands and thousands and thousands of years later. But I bet during those times, Joseph was very confused. But as we look at our life, I'm hoping that we can learn from Joseph and be reminded that no matter what's going on in your life, that God, for Joseph, knew exactly what he was doing. And God knows exactly what he's doing in your life too. And you and I are going to get peace and be able to live life joyfully no matter what happens when we really get that. When we can really start putting that into practice, that no matter what happens, whether it's good or bad, that if we look at it in the natural realm, we're going to be angry and hurt and sad and confused and disappointed and mad and all of those things. But if we can do what Joseph did and move to the spiritual realm, then no matter what happens, we can be reminded that in the spiritual realm, he knows things we don't. We can just be reminded of that. It's like this: Joseph was a part of a bigger picture that he could never have imagined. After Joseph dies, all of his 70-some family members that had come to Egypt, they got stuck in Egypt. And for 400 years, God was silent, and they grew into this huge nation, which is what God was doing. That was part of this big picture of getting this nation in Israel to grow at that particular time. It grew to over 2 million people, all because Joseph's life kind of sucked 500 years before, when his brothers threw him into a pit and sold him into slavery. There was this big picture that he could never, ever see. See, God had a big picture in Joseph's life. He has a big picture for your life, but the key is always this: surrender. God, my life is yours. Tom Patterson wrote a book called Living the Life You Were Meant to Live. He knows this very well. Tom lost his 12-year-old daughter to cancer. His wife of 50 years passed away. His son Tom was killed in an airplane accident, and then his other son died in a car accident. He remarried, and his new wife died 5 months later. If anyone has the right to be bitter, it would be Tom. Someone asked him one day, said, "Tom, you have suffered more than 10 men. What has kept you from bitterness?" He said this. He said, "After my daughter Debbie died, I had a ring made for my wife, a band fashioned out of 3 strands, one for her, one for me, and the third was Jesus, who held us all together." He said this. He said, "We must come to the point where we fully surrender to Christ, nothing held back." He said this: "You can choose to recede or you can choose to surrender." He said, "I chose to surrender." See, that's what I'm hoping today does for us, to surrender the natural for the spiritual, the small picture for the big picture. Because if we do that, we'll be able to live a life like Abraham or Moses or Joseph, or like Kent Brantley, or like Tom Patterson, where no matter whatever happens in our life, we just know beyond a shadow of a doubt that God is doing something bigger, something eternal, something we can't even understand at the moment. And for some reason, just knowing that, I think makes life a little more bearable on this earth. After Kent Brantley, our Ebola guy, was better, he spoke to the media. He said the production of the medicine itself was a miracle on how it ended up at Kent's bedside. It had only been used on monkeys, and only 3 vials were available. He says this: "When I described being sick in bed in Monrovia as my condition worsened each day, he said this: I prayed that God would help me be faithful even in my illness, and I prayed that in my life or in my death that he would be glorified." Kent Brantley says this: "I do not claim to know how God works, but this I do know: I was facing death, and now I'm alive. And with life comes responsibility. The Apostle Paul puts it this way: for me to live as Christ and to die as gain. Because I live, I ought to use my life in a way that is meaningful and helpful to my neighbor. This is not for my own glory. It is for God who gave me life." Big picture was so much more than about him and his feelings and poor me. If you are confused with the twists and turns in your life, I want you to think big picture, spiritual realm. Because always know this: you may be confused as to what's going on in your life, but God is not. And I hope today that is really encouraging. Have a really good week. you.